It was a cold and rainy July morning in the mountains of Wyoming. Bill sat on the porch, his feet up on the table in front of him, a dying cigarette in his mind, his coffee cold. He looked across the lake to the mountains on the other side and sighed. The adventure he had planned hadn't quite worked out the way he had hoped. A bet from a friend had made him buy a remote cabin, load up a sled with provisions and books and pull it 2 days through heavy underbrush to get to the cabin. Hacking his way through the foliage had given him a lot of time to think and get up his courage to face the prospect of being alone in the middle of nowhere for 3 months. He hadn't taken a phone or a computer, and the cabin was about as off-grid as you could get. Electricity was only had by a generator out back that ran on solar power. And that meant either a shower or food each day. He usually chose the food. Or showered and just opened one of the many cans of beans or soup he'd brought and made it cold. Some days he had to do without both, as the cabin was in a deep valley with lots of clouds. Sun was sometimes something he could only dream about. At least there was plenty of water from the lake, as long as he boiled it long enough. Bill had now been in the cabin for only half the time he planned, but he was running out of food. He had somehow miscalculated. While his friend knew where he was, they had agreed that the friend wouldn't try to rescue him or come to the cabin to check on him. Anyway, he knew the friend wasn't really that into hacking through underbrush for 2 days. No one else had a clue where he was. He had told colleagues, family and friends that he had sold everything to go on a world tour where he would meditate and write his next book. They weren't to contact him, no matter what happened. Bill wondered how many emails, voicemails and text messages he had waiting for him. Knowing his friends and family, at least, they weren't going to listen to what he told them. He wondered if they had sent out a search party for him. Bill hadn't given them an itinerary, so actually they would no way of knowing where he was on his supposed cruise. Sucking the last of the tobacco, he told himself it was only for 3 months. They weren't going to have him declared dead just yet. And anyway, there wasn't much left to get. He really had sold a lot to buy the cabin and prepare for the 3-month getaway. He was sitting outside all morning debating what to do. Would he try to stretch the food he had or start doing something he hated, hunting and foraging for food himself? He had seen plenty of deer and other animals in the woods, so he could try and hunt them. And there must be plants and weeds he could gather for food. He had smartly thought of bringing several books on the subject, so that he didn't accidentally pick and eat something poisonous. Bill swept his feet onto the ground and got up from his chair. He left everything on the table and walked off the porch into the woods. He had managed to open a fairly nice round route through the woods and around the lake, so he could get some daily exercise. This was a good time to use it as any. He needed to make a decision on what to do. He couldn't wait weeks to make it. And anyway, the food would be gone by then. Bill started down the path heading south. Looking up, he was happy to see blue sky. The rain in these parts could be something fierce. And while the path was cleared, blowing wind and rain could make it pretty difficult to find his way back to the cabin. In that case, he thought, the decision of what to do would have been made by Mother Nature. Bill rounded a corner and saw a deer. It was chewing on some grass and somehow didn't notice him. He stopped quietly and stared at the deer, its soft fur, its cute face, and he knew what he had to do. There was no way he was going to stay in the cabin and kill the likes of the deer in front of him. And he was too much of a coward to try and gather plants. In fact, he didn't know how he had made it through the first 6 weeks with not much of a problem. Looking back on the trek to the cabin, he was still not sure how he did it. Bill continued his walk around the full path, rather than turning around and heading straight back to the cabin to get ready. He needed the extra time to finalize his decision and decide when and how to head out. There was still some food and his precious coffee left for maybe another week if he ate only once a day. He spent the next hour of the walk deciding how much food he would need to pack for the 2 days, how much water he could carry, and how many of his precious books he would take. Bill knew he would have to leave the sled at the cabin. He just didn't want to have to deal with that or hacking back through the woods, greenery brush. If he was going to get out of there, he wanted to get back to civilization as quickly as possible, no hindrances, no delays. As he thought of getting back, he stopped. Damn, his friend. The bet. Shaking this off, he decided it didn't matter. He had tried to live there in the remote cabin in the woods. It hadn't worked out. And though he hated losing a bet, he wasn't going to risk his life to stick it out another 6 weeks. And there was no way he would start killing animals, which actually would have been pretty difficult because he didn't own a gun or bring one with him. The only thing in the cabin he could use was a knife. No way that was going to happen. He made it back to the cabin and decided to take a nice long nap before preparing for the journey home.